Hello, everyone. And hello out there in Zoom land. Okay, can I have your attention? Hello, hello. So this is our favorite program of the year. I am the interim director / assistant director of Wallingford Public Library. And just over there is our new director, Sunny Stark. The folks on Zoom land. Yeah, come. So yeah. Come on. I'm very excited. We are all very excited to welcome Sunny. Maybe some of you recognize Sunny as she was our head of children's services for many years till she left us to go get more experience as the director of EC Scranton Library in Madison. But now she's coming back to us starting Monday, and no one is more thrilled than I am. So, yes.
Actually, that's not true. I'm more thrilled.
Because, yeah, I've had Cindy like this.
It's been.
So you all know Book Buzz. If you haven't been here before, you're in for a real treat tonight. Cindy, I must tell you, has already started working on the spring 2024 Book Buzz. Oh no,
I wish.
She pores over lists of books that are coming out and best ofs and for months and months and months, and compiles a list of thousands of books that are coming out in the next couple of months. And then she painfully culls them down into the lists that you'll be getting, and then more painfully culls it down to the 20 that she's going to be talking about tonight.
So much wine.
Pat said, do you know how much wine that takes? I said, I know, because I'm the one drinking it. So you didn't all come here to hear me talk. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Haken. And enjoy, because it's a wild ride.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for not letting the weather dissuade you from coming. What a gloomy day, but it's great that it's so cozy in here. Thanks to Choate for letting us use the Sally Hart Lodge. We've been wanting to be in the space for a while, and we finally made it work. Thanks to, I'm going to give a shout out because Aileen Axmayer is on Zoom. And her beloved mother, Patricia, passed away a few years ago. And I know, Aileen, you can't hear, but there was a moan in the room. And the family bequeathed money so that we can continue to host Book Buzz out of the library, out in the community. Incredibly generous. Thank you. So we do this program in honor of Pat, in memory of Pat, and we miss her every day. So if you haven't been here before, and for those of you who have, I'm going to do a quick refresher. The first thing to know is there are no rules. And this is not a lecture, this is a discussion. That's so good here. Please interrupt me. Please ask questions. If you are on Zoom, put a question in the chat and Julie will ask it. I love to hear your questions. It gives me a minute to take a drink of water. And also I know, or whatever, and also to know what you're thinking as I'm going. So that's great. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. Also, please get up, take some more wine, have some more food. It's all gonna be out there for the duration. Don't refill. The evening session is always, after work. This is the second time I've done this, so I told Sherry that the second time is more fun because I'm a lot looser. And so we're gonna okay, everyone's loose. It's good. I hope if you're on home on Zoom, you have a glass of wine, you're eating dinner, and we're gonna talk about some great books. So as Julie said, I now have access. I've done this for enough years that I have access to far in advance pre-publication alerts. The alerts that I'm getting right now are from March, which is why I am already working on the spring book buzz. We're going to talk about books that are coming out between Labor Day and the end of February. And what I've done is compiled lists in 10 different genres. And the lists look like this. These are the genre handouts. The one I'm holding is short stories and essays. The 10 are literary fiction, popular fiction, historical fiction, mysteries. I asked you this, if you were at Spring Summer Book Buzz, I said, should I split mysteries and thrillers into 2 different handouts? And you said yes. So mysteries and thrillers, 2 separate handouts. And then other fiction as a catch-all, short stories and essays, biography and memoir, history and politics, and other nonfiction. So there's 10. They will be on that front table in the dining room for you to take at the end. Again, if you haven't been here, you will see them. They're organized. They look like this on the inside. They're organized in chronological order by publication date, and then in alphabetical order by books coming out on the same date. So you have the title, the cover, so you can picture it, and then a little summary of the book. So I did there's 59 books in each handout. Mystery and short stories and essays each have 40. It's 552 books. I promise you that is just a fraction of the books coming out this publishing season. And I've tried over the years, I've sort of learned what you guys like. So there are some books that people are all excited about, but they're very arty or they're very weird or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not for Wallingford. And I've tried to pick in these handouts the books that I think you will want to read, or frankly, that you ought to want to read, and that I'm going to try to encourage you to read. I say that without shame. It is always a difficulty to fit my lists into these handouts. The one that gave me the most trouble this time around was biography. You cannot believe, I told this to Funny last week, the number of amazing biographies that are coming out this fall. And Kaylee Sprague, who is the teen librarian, she loves that genre, and she always wants me to give her the list when I can't get it down to the 59 so that she can cut it for me. She's like, no, she does that all the time. So I got the list down to about 67 and I gave it to her. And an hour later, she came back and said, oh my God. She said, I've never seen a biography list like this and I don't know what to do. And we worked together to get it down to the 59. So that's a doozy. I will also say that, genre is a subjective thing. And you can pick up you can fight with me later about books, why they're in this genre or in this genre. My biggest problem was literary fiction and historical fiction. There can be wonderful, very literary books, and we're actually going to talk about a few of those that are set in the past. And there can be historical fiction that is very literary. So how do you decide where that goes? And I just sort of went with my gut on that. But if that's a genre, if you like historical fiction, you might want to also take the literary fiction handout because you might see some overlap there. And also, this is an ongoing problem. What's biography? What's history? If you think about that for a minute, sometimes if you're doing a biography of a historical figure, it's very tricky to know which is which. So I think that's all I want to say by way of introduction. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So Barb and Katie are going to hand out so again, from the 552 books, I picked 20 that are particularly buzzing. And those are the 20 we're going to talk about tonight. I know that this list is why people on Zoom got these handouts, but they didn't get the 20. And I did get some emails saying, where's the 20? If you are on Zoom, Julie has a PowerPoint presentation of the covers of the 20. And so she's going to share her screen and show you the 20 as we go. So you can see them while I talk about them. So if you want the notable 20 handout, I will send it to you, I promise, but you're going to get the 20 titles, big pictures of the covers coming up on the presentation. Okay, and I know you're all staring at the list, but I promise you, just put it aside. I promise, if you want to take notes on it, that's great, but I promise I'm going to give you more information than you could possibly want on each of those 20 books, I promise. Okay. Okay. We good? Okay, okay. I have props this time. I have props. Book number one is Amazing Grace Adams by Fran Littlewood, which came out on September 5th and is in the other fiction handout. I think I have a book from at least one book from every single one of the 10 handouts. If you're wondering what finger she has up underneath this sticker, it is the one you might suspect. So this book was supposed to come out last spring, and it was pushed to September. It is a debut novel. Normally debut novels have a first print run of 30,000 to 50,000 copies if the publisher's really excited, because debuts are a fluke. This has a 300,000 first print run. It came out in the UK last spring and has done very well. And I can tell you, because I've seen it, that on this upcoming Sunday's New York Times bestseller list, this will be on the list. Who remembers Michael Douglas's movie, 1993 movie, Falling Down? Yeah. About the man in the traffic jam in Los Angeles whose life has gone belly up and who gets out of the car and has an epileptic freak out, right? Yeah. You remember that? Yes. This is that story told from the point of view of a 45-year-old perimenopausal woman. Okay? Grace Adams is a phenomenally talented linguist who is separated from her husband and estranged from her daughter. She is in a car in London on a hot summer day in traffic. Her daughter is turning 16 and she has not been invited to her daughter's birthday. And she has decided to go with a cake to try to fix things. She's on her way to get the cake. She is very late and the traffic is horrible. And she is, I want to get this right, she is on fire from the inside out. Okay, anyone who's perimenopausal, has been perimenopausal, knows what I mean. She gets out of the car. She starts walking across London to get the cake and then to go to the party. So it is about what happens on that walk and what happens when she gets to the party. It is also in flashbacks about when she met her husband, and then when they had the daughter and the early years of that. And there's also flashbacks to a few months earlier, the precipitating events of the estrangement. I read this last week. I will tell you that it is very funny in parts, but actually it's very serious. This woman is going through a very tough time. And I think Fran Littlewood was very deliberate in what she wanted to say about what it means to be a woman approaching middle age. So that's book one. Okay.
Anybody who has had a 16-year-old daughter.
Had a 16-year-old daughter, you could probably understand. Okay, book two, if you've been paying attention, this book will not surprise you. Book two is The Fraud by Zadie Smith. This is the novel on every single most anticipated list of fall 2023. Every single one. So Zadie Smith, in case you have missed her, burst onto the scene in the year 2000 with her debut novel, White Teeth, which she started writing when she was reading English at Cambridge University. It was published when she was 24 years old, and she became the voice of the new generation. She moved from England to the United States, ultimately became a tenured professor at NYU and lived in Greenwich Village with her husband, who's a poet, and their 2 children for 17 years. During the pandemic, she went back to London and back to the Kilbourne neighborhood of London, which is where she grew up and where every single one of her novels is either set or visits. The Fraud is her first novel since 2016. Every single one of her novels has been a bestseller. This is going to debut on the New York Times bestseller list this coming Sunday at number 8. This is her first historical novel. And she always said she was never going to write one, but listen to this for a second. So this is an example. This is in the literary fiction handout, but it is set in Victorian England. Okay. This is what I'm about to tell you is true life, not fiction. In the late 1860s, there was a court case called the Tichborne trial that became an absolute sensation in England. Sir Roger Tichborne was the heir to a vast English estate who is presumed to have died at sea. And in the late 1860s, this guy shows up from Australia and says, I am he. Give me my inheritance. It was, the title is the title, right? It was clear to anyone with a brain that he was not he. He was, in fact, this guy named Arthur Orton, who was a butcher from the East End of London who had moved to Australia. He was an absolute fraud. But he became a populist folk hero. The grocery store owners and the chimney sweeps and the janitors loved him because he was a man of the people, even though he was claiming to be the son of the aristocracy. And so the country was, if this starts to sound familiar to what we might be, I don't do politics in this room, but if this starts to sound, let me give you a quote. The claimant was a man with no center, who moved as the wind moved, a fun-loving, beer-swilling, aristocratic man of the people. So if you're starting to think, why would this case have made her want to write a novel? Think about it a little bit and you might know. So that's the case, okay? And he was found to be a fraud, and then he was tried for the crime of trying to impersonate this guy and actually wound up going to prison. Now, so that's the framework of the novel. However, she focuses on 2 people on the periphery. Again, these are real life people. One is a guy named Andrew Bogle, who was a slave in Jamaica, who knew the Tichborne family for real, and who had come to England, was no longer enslaved, and who stood up next to this guy and said, I know Roger Tichborne, I grew up with him, this is him. Okay, why he did that is one of the questions in the novel, right? The second person Zadie Smith focuses on is maybe one of her best female literary creations ever. She's a real person named Eliza Touchette, who was a Scottish woman, an abolitionist, and a housekeeper to a 19th century novelist named William Henry Ainsworth, who you've never heard of because all of his books were terrible. And he was popular then, and you couldn't find one of his books now to save your life. He's totally out of print. But he was friends with Dickens, and he was friends with Thackeray, and they're in here too. She is a gem, and she is fascinated by the former slave. Fascinated. She knows this guy is a fraud. She's going to the trial. She's looking at this former slave saying, what is he doing? I don't understand. And she decides to find out. That's what this book is about. I read this book. This is my copy, obviously. The library copies are well in circulation. It's unbelievably great. Yes, ma'am.
You said there was a connection to where Zadie Smith is from in these books?
Yes.
I don't want to spoil the book, but do you know what the connection is?
No, it's just that she's Kilbourne is a neighborhood in the northwest of London, and there are scenes set in Kilburn. She always returns to that neighborhood in her books. It's in her. So her mother is Jamaican. Her father who passed away was a much older white British man, and her mother is a Jamaican. So these themes of race and gender and class come up all the time in her books, but this is a perfect crystallization of it. Okay. Book 3. He's looking at you. This cover is so creepy. So creepy. He's looking at you. He's following you. Okay. Book 3 is Elon Musk, the biography of Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson, which came out last Tuesday. This book was embargoed until it came out, so we are just getting the reviews now. I will tell you, and I don't say this lightly, Walter Isaacson is the best biographer writing today. He is the man. His Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci beyond that book. And most recently, The Code Breakers about Jennifer Doudna and the discovery of mRNA, which led to the COVID vaccine. He does biographies like nobody's business. He has spent the last 2 years shadowing Elon Musk at Tesla, at SpaceX, eventually at Twitter, now X. He spoke to his family, his friends, his coworkers, his enemies, to create this portrait, whether you like him or not. And let me tell you, this was a controversial pick in the reference department bullpen. They were like, no. And I said, you don't understand. He is one of the richest, most influential and important men, the richest in the world. And understanding him, regardless of what you think about him, is important. Here's what Isaacson said. He has an epic sense of himself, almost as if he's a comic book character wearing his underpants on the outside, trying to save the world. Okay, so the end result is that he's some mercurial man-child, and I think, right? I think he is on the spectrum, right? With grandiose ambitions and an ego to match. That's the word. So this is, everyone's going to be, I mean, honestly, everyone's going to be talking about this book. Okay.
So Cindy?
Yes.
Did you have an opinion of him that changed after?
So I have to tell you honestly, this book just came in because they held it back. So we just got our copy late last week. I may or may not, I may or may not be first on the whole list for this. I don't know. If you're in the Thursday Night Book Club, you know what I did this weekend. I reread The Lincoln Highway, which we're going to discuss on Thursday. Phenomenal book. It was a notable 20 whenever. And I prepared for this. So the next book I'm going to talk about, I would have been more likely to read if I'd had time this weekend than this one. I think I may be first, and I will let you know what I think. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Last fall, this is true. Last fall, there were more than 20 books. I could not, for the first time, I've been doing this for a while now. For the very first time, I said, I cannot do just 20. And I snuck 10 more in. If you were here, I had a quick little extra 10 that I did rapid fire like that. Yeah. And the Bullet That Missed, which is the third Thursday Murder Club book, was on that list. And Sylvia Lack, who's in Europe and can't join us, but who is a wonderful reader and wonderful patron of the library, was sitting over here. And when I handed that out, she said, how could that not be notable? And then when I handed out the notable, she said, oh, but that's what these are. Okay. If you like mysteries at all, and you have not read the Thursday Murder Club books, you must, the first thing you do when you get home is start reading them. And you have to read them in order. The Thursday Murder Club, The Man Who Died Twice, and then The Bullet That Missed are the first three. This is number 4, The Last Devil to Die. It is coming out tomorrow. The first 3 books have collectively sold more than 5 million copies, which puts it in Harry Potter territory, honestly. Okay. This is set in an upscale retirement community in England. 4 residents of the community, a retired nurse, a retired psychiatrist, a retired trades union official, and just because a retired spy, meet once a week to talk about cold cases, unsolved crimes. And then you know what happens in the village where the retirement community is set, someone is murdered. And they go about figuring it out with sort of the help from the local police. That's the first one. And it goes from there. You must read them in order. I have to tell you, they're not just, if I could have read anything else this weekend, this is the book, because I am not first on the whole list for this, which is my fault. And I want to read this so badly, but this is when I start reading these books, I just start grinning, and you need to settle into the couch with a cup of tea and just go. And I didn't have the time this weekend for that, so I'm going to have to wait. Willie.
I have a question. Of the first 4 books, 3 are set in England.
They're all set in England.
They're all in that same England. And so is it particularly your preference or?
This
choice
he's
or what?
no
How come?
he's a British
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about all the books you.
Oh,
presented.
no, it's no that's a fair it's not Elon Musk is very American, right? Although he's from South Africa. I'm sorry. Willie is pointing out that I'm picking books that are set in England, and she's wondering why. But honestly, Willie, these are right. I mean, this is going to be a massive bestseller. The Fraud already is.
I'm talking about the first 2 as well.
Well, Amazing Grace Adam, I do like to pick debuts. If you can guess at what debuts, like Lessons in Chemistry is a good guess, right? That kind of, what's the next Lessons in Chemistry? And it's doing so well over there, and the number of copies of the first print was so unusual that it's what. That's okay. Well, we'll see how we go as the books go on. I don't think they're that. Okay, all right. Yeah, I want questions. Okay. He has written one of these a year, and in the acknowledgements to this one, he says he's going to take a pause.
Oh, no.
Because he's working on something new. He has promised that he's coming back to this series, that we are going to be with these 4 for a long time. But he's going to do something new, so we're not going to get a 5th one next year. That's going to make this one even more popular. Steven Spielberg has optioned the film rights on this whole series. Okay, Willie may think I'm picking this because I'm an Anglophile, but this is a big deal. I will also tell you, as wonderful and heartwarming and delicious as these are, these deal with what it is really like to grow old. His mother is in a retirement community in Sussex, England, and he has based this community on that. There is some very, very painful stuff about dementia and about the pains of old age. So these are not just cozy mysteries. These are very, very heartwarming books. Okay. Yeah, but yes, they are definitely belong squarely in cozy. Okay. More questions? No. Book 5. Book 5, a very American book, Willie, is book 5. Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post by Martin Barton. Does anyone know who Martin Barton is? No. From 2013 to 2021, Martin Barton was the executive editor of the Washington Post. Okay, not a bad gig. And before he became the executive editor of the Washington Post, he was the head of the Boston Globe for 12 years. Okay, so he's a player in major newspapers. When he joined the Washington Post, the Graham family was at the helm, had owned the Post for 80 years, venerable, very respected, very loved family. 7 or 8 months later, Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame bought the Washington Post. In case you didn't know, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. So that was a paradigm shift for the paper. And then 2 years later, Donald Trump was elected president, and Donald Trump believed and said out loud that the media and the press was the lowest form of humanity, and actively pressured Bezos to censor the Post and to control its content.
That was next.
Right. Okay. So the book is about his time from 2013 to 2021 when he retired, being the head of that newspaper during that incredibly tumultuous time. This is in the History and Politics handout. It's the only book from that handout that we're talking about tonight. It's coming out on the 26th, and it's showing up on all the lists. It's going to be fascinating, I think. Okay. Okay, you don't know?
It probably is.
Bless you. Thank you very much. Cheers, everybody. Cheers. The next book is Going Infinite by Michael Lewis, which is coming out on October 3rd. This is in other nonfiction. Michael Lewis is gifted at explaining complicated things that are important in our society that we need to understand. Case in point, he wrote a book called The Big Short that was about the securitization meltdown in 2008 that led to our last recession, which became a great movie, which I recommend. The book was this big, okay? Not some tome about securitizations, but this big, and in it, he explained what securitizations are and why the crash happened. Incredibly important. He wrote Moneyball, which was also turned into a great movie, which explains baseball and baseball economics and baseball statistics in a way, and his writing is very engaging. So what topic has he taken on in Going Infinite? Cryptocurrency. Okay, which, by the way, we need to understand. And it's super complicated and totally non-intuitive. And his focus is FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. And if you don't know who he is, Google him and be freaked out by the picture that you will see of him. Okay, the FTX exchange was the cryptocurrency exchange. Celebrities wanted to be invested in it, athletes, and including CEOs, very financially astute CEOs wanted to be a part of FTX. And in 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. And he defrauded the investors, not a Ponzi scheme, but a complete defrauding of investors. Michael Lewis was asked by a friend of his several years ago to look into Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX because his friend was thinking about investing, and this book is the result. And cryptocurrency is really important. And Lewis has said that his intention in this book was to, Sam Bankman-Fried is about to go on trial for these crimes, and he wants us, the readers, to be the jurors, as if we're the jurors in the trial. So this book is important and is showing up on all the lists. Very American. Okay. And Willie, see, I'm going to get her back for this. There is nothing more, there's nothing more American than the next book I am going to talk about. Dolly Parton, who is the gift that keeps on giving. She is. This book is called Behind the Seams, My Life in Rhinestones, and it is coming out on October 17th. This is also in other nonfiction. And if you look at the picture, you can tell this is a gift, right? This is a coffee table gift book. Okay. So apart from being a country music star, she has been believe it or not, she did a collaboration with James Patterson. If you were here a few years ago, Run, Rose, Run, which was a massive bestseller and was a book we talked about. She is a lover of books, so I will love her forever for that. She founded something called the Imagination Library, which its purpose is to give books to kids that don't have books. Listen, because she started in the US, it's now the US, the UK, Ireland, Canada, and Australia. They give 2 million books a month. 2 million books a month to kids in need. And to date have given well over 200 million books away. So for me, that's it. She is about to come out in November with her 49th album, which for the first time is a rock album instead of a country music album. She is collaborating with every rock star. She's collaborating with Elton John, with Sting, with Paul McCartney, with Peter Frampton, with Debbie Harry, with Pat Benatar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's 2 CDs, it's 4 LPs, and she's already released. I mean, she's just amazing.
Everybody wants to do it.
Right? However, she has a lifelong love for fashion. She has had this, like, for her whole life, she's had this absolute obsession with fashion. And her look, regardless of whether or not you would ever wear any of her clothing, she has a very iconic look that is not typical of a country music look. This book is about her closet. There are 450 color pictures in this book, many from her own private collection, that traces the history of her evolution in her look from the 1960s to now. And it's, if you are a Dolly Parton fan, or if you know one, you're going to buy this for them for Christmas. I mean, it's going to be huge.
She said that multiple being creative, really style her.
She has a very unique style. Very unique style.
Fabulous. Did anybody go see the show at the Noma Terrace this summer? About Dolly, they're in affiliation with the Good Speed. Did anybody?
People on Zoom were talking about a show that was about Dolly that was around here this summer.
Was that the Good Speed?
At the Good Speed.
Noma Terrace. It was.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. She's great. We love her.
We all love
Okay.
Dolly.
All right. The next book is The Exchange by John Grisham, American, which is coming out on October 17th. Okay, this is in the popular fiction handout. I don't usually have books. I don't usually pick in the 20 a popular fiction handout, because by definition, every book in that handout is going to be a bestseller. However, this book is buzzing. So John Grisham's breakout novel was his second novel, which is pretty good, by the way, that it wasn't his 4th or 5th. And it was The Firm, which came out in 1991. And then Tom Cruise was in the movie in 1993. Even before the movie came out, it already sold a couple million copies. And he's gone on to write literally almost 50 more novels since then, 50. But none of them have come back to the story of The Firm, which is about this guy, Mitch McDeere, who graduates from law school and goes to work for a law firm in Memphis, and then discovers that this law firm has ties to the criminal underworld. And he and his wife, Abby, wind up taking the law firm down. And when the book ends, they're in the Cayman Islands with a lot of money. And The Exchange is a sequel. And it's set 15 years after somebody in the afternoon said, will Tom Cruise be in the movie of The Exchange? We'll see. It's set 15 years after The Firm ends. Mitch is now a partner in the largest law firm in the world, which is set in New York. And I'm not really sure it matters what it's about, but a friend of his is kidnapped in Libya, and Mitch becomes involved in a hostage negotiation that puts him at the center of an international emergency. Ooh, okay. But I mean, I don't read these kinds of books, but but this is, I mean, John Grisham's books are bestsellers, but this one is going to be probably a particularly big one. because it's the sequel to The Firm. Okay. Okay. The next book, look, Willie, look at the title of the next book is so American. Okay. It's called America Fantastica, by Tim O'Brien, and it's coming out on October 24th. Does anyone remember what Tim O'Brien's? The Things They Carry.
Yeah.
Very good. The Things They Carry came out in 1990. The retired high school teacher in the corner his mouth is open. They're interconnected short stories that are semi-autobiographical about his experiences in Vietnam. And the book is a massive bestseller, is taught in middle schools and high schools to this day, and made him very famous. Over the years, he's written nonfiction, he's written fiction. He hasn't written a novel in 20 years. And he has said that this one, America Fantastica, is going to be his last novel. This one is so trippy, I don't even know what to tell you. It is a road trip, dark road trip novel that is about a guy named Boyd Halverson, who was an esteemed, very highly regarded journalist, who then became a disgraced journalist. And when we meet him, he is robbing a bank in California, and he takes the bank teller who gives him the money hostage. Here's the bank teller's named Angie Bing. Here's the description of Angie: a young, born-again motor mouth with a savior complex and an amusingly unabashed libido. Okay, so he takes Angie and they go to Mexico. Angie gets word to her fiance, a guy named Randy, who has a Charles Manson fantasy complex, who heads to Mexico. Also heading to Mexico after them are corrupt bankers, billionaires, cops, election deniers, an inept private eye, Boyd's empathetic ex, an ethically challenged fitness trainer, a suicidal drifter, and a sadistic schizophrenic. Okay, so they all go down to Mexico looking for Boyd and Angie. They turn around and head back up to Minnesota and ultimately return to California. So this is a 7,000-mile road trip that takes the better part of a year. It's set in 2019, and it sounds crazy good. So that's everyone is very excited about that one. Okay. I've talked to you in the past about getting to read what are called ARCs, advanced reader copies of books. So this is an ARC. Notice that it doesn't have a cover on it. It actually does. Hold on. That's the cover. But you see, it's a paperback. It's like it's a proof. And what's on this is a letter from the author on the front. And an interview with the author on the back. This is an ARC, and this is an ARC of Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward, which is coming out October 24th. This is another example of a book that could be in historical fiction, but is in literary fiction. Jesmyn Ward, and I thought about this a lot, but I'm going to say this. She is the next generation Toni Morrison. Wow. That's how talented she is. And Luz agrees. The last two novels she wrote, Salvage the Bones and Sing Unburied Sing, both won the National Book Award. She is the youngest ever recipient of the Library of Congress Prize for Fiction, which is a very prestigious prize. She's also a MacArthur Fellow. Every single one of the books she's written until this one has been set in her hometown of Mississippi, where she still lives. This one is set in the South before the Civil War. Does Let Us Descend mean anything to you?
Isn't it American spiritual? Go down to the
Yes, but that's not okay. But this is actually from the Inferno. Let Us Descend is what they say when they start their descent into the circles of hell. Okay. But that one is also relevant. This is about a slave girl named Annis whose mother is the cook in a plantation in Virginia, and whose father is the owner of the plantation. Annis is sold to, this was happening in Virginia before the Civil War. They were running out of money and selling their slaves down south, further south. So the slaves got further south by walking. And it was horrific. They tied them together and they marched them down. So Annis goes on a march from Virginia to New Orleans. So the first part of the book is that march. And then she is sold onto a sugar plantation in Louisiana. And it is about what happens to her. Annis's grandmother was a warrior, a female warrior in Africa, and she channels that a fair bit. I will tell you that Jesmyn Ward's husband was an early COVID victim. He died in January of 2020. He was 33 years old. And her grief is palpable in this book. This is a tough, I've read this. This is a tough read, but it is on every most anticipated list. Okay. Now, I should have an arc of this next book, except that my dear friend Tisha, who may be on Zoom, I lent it to her because I knew she was going to love it, and she gave it to her sister because she loved it and wanted her sister to read it. So I don't have it to hold up for you, but I did have an arc of it, and I read it and I loved it. It's Absolution by Alice McDermott, and it's coming out on October 31st. Alice McDermott is an Irish-American writer, and she's a very talented writer. She writes quiet novels, so they don't get a lot of attention necessarily, but she's a writer's writer. So when she has a new book out, people buzz about it because they love her. And so this book has appeared on a bunch of lists, and I'm delighted because I loved it. And so I get to tell you about it. And I will also tell you that Ann Patchett, because I can't do a book buzz without talking about Ann Patchett, you know,
Or a book club.
or a book club, you know, her new novel, Tom Lake, is at the top of the bestseller lists and the top of our whole list. And she gave a ton of interviews to newspapers and magazines, and she's on tour for the book. And in a very early interview, this is why I love her. Instead of talking about her new novel, Tom Lake, she said to the interviewer, I'm going to give you 2 super hot tips of books that are going to come out soon that are going to win everything. And one of her tips was Absolution. I'm not going to tell you the other one because it's coming out in March, and it's almost certainly a notable 20 next time. I'm not telling you. Aileen, if you're watching, we read Alice McDermott's novel At Weddings and Wakes in memory of your mother in the Thursday night book club. And we really, there's a lot, it's, you know, it's a lot on the surface and then so much more underneath is what these novels are about. This one is I really don't feel we've read this story before. This is set in the early 1960s, and it is about women who accompanied their husbands to Vietnam. This was before the war really got going. There were a lot of American corporate men who were sent, who were sort of surveying the situation and doing deals and trying to get a sense of the state of things. And the main character, a woman named Trisha, is a newlywed whose husband is an oil engineer who's on loan to the US Navy, and they get sent to Vietnam. And she gets swept up into these group of wives who are there. And the sort of the ringleader of the wives is a woman named Charlene, whose husband is a big corporate man. And so she's sort of the linchpin of the parties and the gatherings and stuff. But she wants to do good. She wants to make a difference. And she goes about with these women gathering toys and chocolate and other gifts. And they go to hospitals and they go to orphanages and they try to make the children's lives a little better. And they eventually go out of Saigon into a leper colony, which is dangerous, and go there. And the book is about 2/3 of the book is then, and then the rest of the book is 60 years later. Charlene's daughter has reached out to Trisha, and they try to make sense of that time and the legacy of that time. It's a very quietly powerful book. I think it's her best novel. And also you can't tell the richness of the blue in the cover is dynamite. It's a really striking cover. Okay. Okay, the next book is Class by Stephanie Land, which is coming out on November 7th. Do you remember a book? It was called Made. It was a white book with a yellow glove, cleaning glove on it. So Stephanie Land wrote Made. It was a massive bestseller and turned into a Netflix series about it was a memoir. She was a 28-year-old single mother who wanted very badly to go to college and become a writer, and she was poor. That's okay. And she wrote in Made about her experiences working during the day as a maid for upper middle class families in Washington state, and at night going to college, and being unbelievably poor, precariously, terrifyingly poor. And what struck a chord in Made is it's not about race in that book. Stephanie Land is white, but all the obstacles she encountered in trying to survive and get her college degree. So Class is that story from a different, shifting the angle 90 degrees, if you will, because what she also encountered is the presumptions about the working poor wanting to get a college degree and become a writer, and the obstacles she encountered not from economy but from class. Obviously she's a successful writer, and her story has been told on Netflix, so she's not poor anymore, but so she told it one way, now she's telling it a different way. And I think it will have a similar kind of power and resonance. And because of the success of Made, this is showing up on a lot of lists. Okay. The next book, and Willie, I just want to point out how American everything has been since you made your question. You had your question. Just point that out. If Fraud was the novel that was the most anticipated novel of the fall, My Name is Barbara by Barbara Streisand is the most anticipated nonfiction book of the fall. My whole life, I have thought that Barbara Streisand had the best female voice in the world. She has lived an extraordinary life. She's got, the EGOT, the Emmy, the Grammy, the Oscar, the Tonys. She's promised this book for years, and it is finally coming out. It's 60 plus years of her memories and her experiences. It's gonna be a wow. It is 1,000 pages long because no one is editing Barbara Streisand. Right? So I think we already have it on order. If not, I know whose card it's in, and I'm pretty sure he ordered it. This is a doozy. It's gonna be a very big deal, and a very, very big book. Yep. Yes.
A lot of celebrity, like memoirs are kind of written.
No, she wrote this. She wrote this one. That's why she promised this years ago. Yeah, it's a very good question. And, there are a lot of celebrity memoirs coming out, but there are also a lot of biographies. So you can, but she wrote this one. She's very talented. She definitely wrote this one. That's it. It's so unfair. It's so unfair. And she's married to James Brolin. Really. And she's a big animal lover. She's all that. But she is very, very high maintenance. She's very high maintenance. Okay. The next book is Day by Michael Cunningham, which is coming out on November 14th. This is a little anecdote about life in my house. So once upon a time, the New York Times Sunday paper came on Sunday. And it was sacred, but now it comes half on Saturday and half on Sunday, and I actually, which is a travesty. And I actually used to mutiny and not touch it on Saturday and only read on Sunday, but I can't do that anymore. So this past Saturday was the big fall, the arts and leisure section of the Sunday paper comes on Saturdays. And this past Saturday had the big fall preview, arts and leisure, which was 4 or 5 sections on its own, just arts and leisure with theater and movies and classical opera and art and TV, although there's a strike and all the rest of it. And at the very end, instead of in the book review, there was the New York Times big books of the fall, which had been, I saw that online earlier, and a full page article about Day by Michael Cunningham. And my husband and I, this is Saturday morning, we have coffee, we're in bed, the dog is on the, and I'm flipping through and I get to this full page article and I jumped up and because the Notable 20 was finished and this was one of the books. And I was like, so that's what it's like to live with me in my house. Okay, so Michael Cunningham is famous. He's written a lot of novels, but he is famous for one called The Hours, which was his 4th novel, and which is his homage to Virginia Woolf and to Mrs. Dalloway, which is his book, his Desert Island book. And The Hours was very famously turned into a movie with Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore. It's about Virginia Woolf writing Mrs. Dalloway. It's about a modern day Mrs. Dalloway, and it is about a woman in the 1950s who's very unhappy in her life reading Mrs. Dalloway, and it's brilliant. And he hasn't written a novel in 10 years, and he has written Day, which is told over the course of the same day in 3 years, April 5th, 2019, 2020, and 2021. So think about that for a second, and focuses on one family in Brooklyn. And the wife works for a magazine. The husband is a former rock star who's a stay-at-home dad. They have a 10-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter in 2019. And the wife's brother, who is sort of a lost soul, is living with them. And the marriage is not in great shape. That's 2019. Fast forward a year, we're in the pandemic. The lost soul brother was traveling in Iceland and is stuck there, and the family is stuck in the house, in the townhouse in Brooklyn. And you can imagine in that if your relationship wasn't strong before, that's going to put a lot of pressure on it. And then we get the aftermath in 2021. This is getting all kinds of early buzz. He said in the article that he is surprised that more novelists are not writing about the pandemic. That he was expecting more, and he actually said, how does anybody write a contemporary novel that's about human beings that's not about the pandemic? I've heard people say that it's too soon to read about the pandemic, but I think we're going to see this, and reading about it is a way to help work through and understand other people's experiences of the pandemic. So this is going to be a big book. Okay, where is she? So late in the day, there you are. Okay, so Claire Keegan is an Irish author. She has written, this is her 5th book, So Late in the Day. The sum total of pages in the 5 books is under 700. She is known for, this is a quote, the miraculous density of her short fiction. She's written 2 short story collections. Then she wrote a novella called Foster, 95 pages. Unbelievable.
That was great.
And then a novel, her sole novel, called Small Things Like These, which the Thursday Night Book Club is reading in December, 128 pages, shortlisted for the Booker and won the Orwell Prize for political fiction. I am a big fan of short fiction because I'm impressed by what can happen in a few pages. she is the bomb. Right? Hello, right?
Just this little book that I read yesterday, that's in the assistant diary, Foster, that it made me think of, everything that I do every minute, my morals, like what's going on. It's so thoughtful, it's so emotional.
Amazing.
Power to it.
Right. You read them, you step away, then you read them again because they contain layers and layers and layers. She's amazing. Okay. So Late in the Day is a short story collection. It's in the short story handout. 3 stories about gender dynamics, one in the office, one at home, and one that focuses on a prior relationship. The title story ran in the New Yorker originally. She has revised it for this book. George Saunders, who is generally viewed as the reigning champion of the short story in America, was on the New Yorker podcast, was asked what his favorite short story that ever ran in the New Yorker was, and he said this one. Okay, he refused to read it because it contains a word he did not want to say out loud, and I'm not going to say it out loud either. So this is already out in the UK, getting all kinds of excitement. Irish, not English. And coming out here on November 21st. Okay. Now, everything up until now has been on many most anticipated lists. This next one is at present. And the last 4 come out next year, so they're not on lists, they're just educated guesses. Okay? Michael Caine, the actor. We love Michael, right? We love Michael Caine. Right? Alfie, Educating Rita, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. He won Oscars for Hannah and Her Sisters and Cider House Rules. He is also, Julie, I know you're listening, played Scrooge in the best Christmas Carol movie ever, The Muppets Christmas Carol. We love, Julie doesn't agree with me. She says she thinks that the Mr. Magoo one was the best, but it is not the best. The Muppets Christmas Carol was the best Christmas Carol movie. Seriously. He's a wonderful, right? We love him. He's written memoirs in the past. He is 90 years old, which makes me feel old. And he's basically retired from acting. But he said in an interview that his 2 loves his whole life were the cinema and the library. This is a quote from the interview. I read books like wildfire. There's an American author called Tom Clancy. He's my favorite. Anything and everything by him. I'm an adventure man. I don't do literature. I just do fun. Gangs, guns, and war, that sort of thing. Okay. So you know what this is a thriller. The interviewer, the article that interview was in actually said, this probably is not going to be good at all, but who cares? Because it's Michael Caine. It's about the discovery of uranium in a dump in the East End of London. And then before the cops can come, the uranium is stolen, and then everyone goes on a search for the uranium. That's what it's about. But so if you like thrillers, it's a lead child, Tom Clancy style. Yeah, right. Okay, so that's December 5th. Okay. All right, this next book, I mostly picked this next book so I could look at you and say, erotic vagrancy. No, this is a book about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, right? Everyone's going to want to read this book. It is coming out on January 23rd. It's in the biography handout. It took Roger Lewis 13 years to write this book, which an early reviewer has already called a hot thunderstorm of a book. Here's what he said. This is what Lewis said. This is a book about more than it seems at first to be about. It is an inferno story, an alcoholic story, a pop art story, an occult story. Burton and Taylor were icons of indulgence, animal spirits. They represented glamour, sensationalism, lives lived to the full, diamonds, fur coats, private jets, with every emotion ready to be experienced before the cameras. With Burton and Taylor, the barriers between art and the world finally dissolved. They didn't have to do anything save exist. Their ripeness was all. Oh my God, right? So I'm just taking an educated guess that everyone's going to want to read this book. And it's coming out on January 23rd.
How many people named their dogs Elizabeth Taylor? I have like two friends.
There you go. There you go. I need, okay. Okay. The next book is 14 Days by Margaret Atwood. Sort of. I'll come back to that. Bear with me for a second. In the mid 14th century, bear with me, an Italian writer named Giovanni Boccaccio wrote a book called The Decameron. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
About a group of people who leave Florence and go to a villa outside of Florence to escape the Black Death and tell each other stories to stay sane. Okay? 14 Days is a pandemic version of that. Now, New York was, I'm just going to put out there, New York City was the worst place to be during the pandemic. If you could, you got out, right? You had a second home, you could rent something somewhere else, you had friends that had a big home where you could all stay. But if you couldn't, you stayed, and it was awful. This is about a group of people who live in a building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan who have nowhere to go, and about their gathering, on the rooftop of the building every night to tell stories. And that's how, if you've lived in an apartment in Manhattan, you don't know your neighbors. You don't. You see them. You don't. And this is how they connected and got to know each other. So, I might have picked this book because of that. I might have picked this book because Margaret Atwood is Margaret Atwood, but I didn't pick this book for either of those reasons. This book is a collaborative novel from the Authors Guild, which is a nonprofit foundation that supports U.S. writers who are struggling. And the president of the guild is Douglas Preston, of Preston and Child, who writes the thrillers. And the special vig about this book is that every character in it is written by a different author. And not just Joe Schmo author, Margaret Atwood, John Grisham, Scott Turow, Douglas Preston, Diana Gabaldon, who's the Outlander author, Celeste Ng, Emma Donahue, Meg Wolitzer, this many. I mean, the paragraph of my notes is this many. So you're hearing, it's not just a different voice, it's a different writer for every single character in the book. So
It's not different stories.
every time you hear a different character's voice, it's a different writer. And at the end, you find out who wrote each character. So that's super new and original. And that's why this is I think this is fascinating. Okay. The next book is The Women by Kristen Hanna, which is coming out February 6th. This is in the historical fiction handout. Kristen Hanna was already a very successful novelist, especially for Firefly Lane, which became a Netflix sensation before she flipped to historical fiction. She's written 3 historical fiction novels. Each one has been a mega bestseller. The Great Alone, Nightingale, and The Four Winds. The Women, and if you think about absolution, and I told you we had not heard that story before, it's very interesting to me. The Women is about a very sheltered young woman who grows up in a conservative household in California, and goes to Vietnam in the Army Nurse Corps, and about the way her world opens up. She is woefully unprepared, about the way her world opens up, and then about how challenging it is when she returns. So 2 books in a few months from a female perspective about Vietnam. It's very interesting to me that this is happening now. I'm wondering if a bunch of documents that had been classified got declassified. This sort of thing happens if you see a theme. This book has a 1 million copy first print. So this is not just an educated guess. This is going to be a doozy. Okay. Last book, conveniently called End of Story, just happily for me. Does anyone remember A.J. Finn? Does that name ring a bell?
The woman in the
The Woman in the Window. The Woman in the Window was a mega bestseller in the unreliable narrator psychological thriller genre. Came out in 2018, massive bestseller, turned into a Netflix movie starring Amy Adams and Gary Oldman. Huge success, huge. For extra big, A.J. Finn is the pen name of a guy named Dan Mallory, who is the executive editor of William Morrow, which is a big publishing imprint. And in 2019, the New Yorker did a big article about Dan Mallory that exposed a lot of what he had said about his life as a complete lie, professionally and personally. And he went, I would like to say he did not get fired. He just went dark for several years. And he's now written a new book called End of Story. And there's every reason to expect it to be a big deal for all the reasons that I just said. It is a mystery, but also a psychological, unreliable narrator. The premise is that a very successful mystery writer who lives in a mansion in San Francisco is dying. And he calls a correspondent of his who's an expert on detective fiction and says, come, I'll be dead in 3 months. Come and tell my story. Come and talk to me and then write my story. And there's he lives with his second wife and his daughter and a nephew. And it turns out that 20 years earlier, his first wife and his teenage son both disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the layers and the layers, and it evolves. So that's coming out on February 20th, and I expect it to be a big deal. And those are your notable 20. Okay. I'm sorry. You know, honestly, the reason there weren't, it's very interesting this fall, because if you came to the spring book buzz, I told you that I was stunned by the books that were coming out this past summer, because they were literary fiction, big, heavy hitters that would normally be fall books, like Tom Lake, like the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, like the Colson Whitehead, and that was weird that they were coming out in the summer. And that's why, because imagine having to add those, right? Those should all have been fall books. Ann Patchett actually on September 5th, in her bookstore, she did a video about new releases, and she said, this is why my book came out in the beginning of August instead of the beginning of September, because then I had no competition. And now look at all the books that are coming out. So it is a different shift. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes, look.
Not to be that person, but it is Hispanic Heritage Month.
It is. So that is a fair point. There are a lot of Latino books in the handouts, but when I am picking the 20 notables, I am picking books that are appearing a lot on the most anticipated books that I know will also appeal here. But there are plenty of Latino books in the handouts, I promise. And also, by the way, in the National Book Award long list that just came out, and which are discussed in the blog post I just wrote. So yeah. So I always like to ask, this, imagine you've walked into the dining room, and in addition to the genre handouts, all of the 20 books that I've just discussed are sitting there. Which one, you can take one. Which one will you take? Last Devil to Die. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So late in the day.
So late in the day, because you're a Claire Keegan fan now. Yeah. The Fraud. Or Streisand, okay. Fraud looks good. What else? The Woman, Kristen Hanna over here. 14 days. 14 days. Yeah, it's gonna be really something. There's a lot. I know. There's a lot. Amazing Grace. Yeah, you like this. I know. You like that. The daughter at 16. Yes, the daughter. What I didn't say, she's becoming a TikTok sensation, and it's not going well. The tough days. Anyone else? No perimenopause, no perimenopause.
But back then.
Okay, we're thinking. Thank you for coming. Take the genre handouts, take another glass of wine, take a cookie for the road. I'll see you in March. Thank you, everyone.